My husband's elite, old money family paid me $5 million to disappear, so he could marry his pregnant mistress and secure his precious, flawless bloodline. I took their hush money without shedding a single tear, packed a single suitcase, and moved across the world to build my own empire. But while they were busy planning the society wedding of the decade and celebrating their impending heirs, the real encrypted medical records landed on my desk. The documents proved that my ex-husband was completely, irreversibly sterile. The twin boys his mistress was carrying belonged to someone else entirely. Before I delve into this absolute nightmare of betrayal and retribution, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had a toxic, manipulative family try to tear you down to protect their golden child. Trust me, you will want to hear how I used their own severance package to legally purchase their entire dynasty. My name is Serafina. I am 32 years old, and the defining moment of my entire existence did not happen with a screaming match or a dramatic, tear-filled argument. It happened with the crisp, quiet sound of heavy parchment paper sliding across a polished mahogany dining table. The $5 million cashier's check came to a halt right in front of me, its bold, imposing zeros staring up at me like a cruel, calculated mockery of my 5-year marriage. Across from me sat my mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, the undisputed queen bee of Charleston's most influential high society circle, and the ruthless matriarch of the Sterling Family Trust. She sat erect, wearing a vintage Chanel suit, her face a mask of contoured disdain. "Take it, Serafina," Eleanor said, her voice sharp enough to cut through solid glass. "Camilla is carrying twin boys, the Sterling legacy requisite heirs, and your womb has been utterly empty for 5 years. It is time for you to step aside and let a real woman take your place." I slowly looked up from the cashier's check. Beside Eleanor sat my husband, Julian. The man who had once stood before 500 distinguished guests and vowed to love me in sickness and in health was currently staring a hole into the imported Persian rug, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked like a scolded child rather than the 33-year-old chief executive officer of a massive generational investment firm. His hand was tightly gripping the manicured fingers of the woman sitting next to him. That woman was Camilla. She was 24, a former influencer who had recently clawed her way into our exclusive high society circles by attaching herself to the wealthiest men in the room, and had spent the last 14 months playing the sweet, innocent victim at every charity gala and country club luncheon, subtly undermining me while smiling to my face. Right now, she was doing what she did best. Camilla rested her free hand on her barely visible baby bump and forced a dramatic, breathy sob that echoed through the massive, silent dining room. "Please, Serafina," Camilla whimpered, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk tissue. "I never meant to hurt you, and really did not, but Julian and I are so deeply, passionately in love. These babies need a real home, a complete family. You have to understand that you cannot give him what he needs as a man. Do the right thing for the children. Let him go." I sat still, absorbing the sheer breathtaking audacity of the scene before me. For 5 long years, I had endured the suffocating, crushing weight of the Sterling family's impossible expectations, and was a forensic art authenticator, an independent expert who specialized in detecting forged masterpieces and verifying multi-million-dollar antiquities for private collectors. I had built my specialized business from the ground up, rather than riding on old money coattails. Naturally, I was never considered good enough for Eleanor. While her friends spent their days hosting lavish garden parties and comparing their designer outfits, I was on flights to Geneva and Paris, analyzing brushstrokes under ultraviolet light and exposing fraudulent auction houses. My financial independence intimidated them. I did not come from a legacy family, and was just a hard-working woman who dared to marry the untouchable Prince of Charleston. Julian had fought for me back then. He had held my hand and promised me that his family's toxic obsession with bloodlines and social status did not matter. But now, that exact same man sat in cowardly, pathetic silence, while his mother and his mistress humiliated me in my own dining room. The threat hung heavy in the air, practically suffocating the room. Julian finally looked up, his expression a sickening, twisted mix of pity, guilt, and sheer arrogance. "Just sign the papers, Serafina," he muttered, sliding a thick, heavy legal folder across the table to join the check. "Doctor, Vance said your condition is permanent, the severe scarring on your ovaries, it is irreversible. I need a son to take over the family fund one day. You know how important the Sterling legacy is to my mother, and to the community. I am sorry, but Camilla is giving me what you physically cannot." The mention of my supposed medical condition felt like a brutal, physical blow to my chest, but I refused to let them see me bleed. For the past 2 years, Julian and I had been visiting Dr. Vance, the esteemed Sterling family physician. Every test, every painful and invasive procedure had pointed to me as the singular problem. Dr. Vance had sat me down just 3 months ago, shaking his head with rehearsed clinical sympathy, telling me that I was barren. The guilt had eaten me alive. I had spent countless nights crying on the cold bathroom floor, apologizing to Julian for failing him as a wife, while he held me and told me we would get through it together. And all that time, while I was mourning the children I thought I could never have, he had been sleeping with Camilla in luxury hotel rooms paid for by his mother, and looked at the three of them. Eleanor, with her cold, calculating eyes that only saw people as disposable pawns on a chessboard. Julian, the pathetic mama's boy who valued his pristine public image over his sacred wedding vows. And Camilla, the opportunistic snake waiting to claim my throne, my husband, and my house. They expected me to break down, they wanted me to scream, to throw my crystal water glass against the wall, to beg Julian to stay, or to angrily tear up the check in a fit of injured pride, and wanted a dramatic performance that would justify their cruelty. They wanted to prove to themselves that I was just an unstable, emotional woman who never belonged in their elite, refined world. Instead, a strange icy calm washed over my entire nervous system. The heavy fog of guilt and inadequacy that had clouded my mind for years suddenly lifted, leaving behind a crystal-clear vision of my reality. I was not losing a family today, and was being handed the key to my ultimate freedom, funded by the very people who thought they were destroying my life. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my favorite heavy gold fountain pen. The satisfying click of the cap being removed made Camilla flinch slightly, as if she expected me to use it as a weapon. Without uttering a single word, I opened the leather-bound legal folder and skimmed the divorce agreement. It was ironclad, favoring the Sterlings, stripping me of any claim to the estate, the luxury vehicles, or the massive family business. But it also severed every single legal and financial tie I had to them forever, and placed the pen on the thick parchment paper, and signed my name on the dotted line. My signature was smooth, steady, and unapologetic. I flipped to the next page and signed again. Page after page, I gave away my rights to the summer home, the shared investment portfolios, and the joint bank accounts, and gave away my claim to the antique furniture we had picked out together in Italy. I did not pause to wipe away tears because there were none left to shed or hesitate. The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic scratching of my pen against the paper. Each stroke of the pen felt less like a surrender, and more like the snapping of heavy iron chains that had kept me bound to this miserable family. When I finished signing the last document, I closed the folder and slid it back across the table toward Julian. Then, I reached out and picked up the $5 million cashier's check, and folded it neatly in half and tucked it into the inner pocket of my purse. Julian stared at me, his jaw slightly slack, his brow furrowed in deep, uncomfortable confusion. "That is it?" he asked, his voice laced with pure disbelief. "You are not going to fight this? You are just going to take the money and leave?" I stood up slowly from the table, smoothing out the skirt of my tailored dress, and looked down at the man I had dedicated my entire 20s to, feeling nothing but absolute, hollow disgust. "You offered me a buyout, Julian. I am a businesswoman. I recognize a profitable exit when I see one." Eleanor let out a haughty, satisfied laugh, leaning back in her antique chair. I told you she was just a gold digger at heart, she sneered to her son, though she kept her eyes fixed triumphantly on me. She does not care about you, Julian, and only cares about the payout. Let her go back to the bottom where she belongs, good riddance. I picked up my purse, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and looked into Eleanor's eyes. The matriarch looked so smug, so confident in her flawless victory. She believed she had bought her son's happiness, secured her family's pristine public image, and disposed of the trash. She had no idea that the foundation of her entire grand empire was built on a massive, humiliating lie. Enjoy the wedding, Eleanor, I said, my voice eerily calm, steady, and projecting clearly across the massive room. And congratulations on the twin boys, Julian. I am sure they will be everything you deserve. But remember one thing before you start engraving those expensive silver baby rattles. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out. I let my gaze shift from Julian's confused face to Camilla's suddenly nervous expression, and finally back to Eleanor's cold, calculating stare, and offered them a slow, chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. Biology has a very wicked sense of humor. I turned on my heel and walked toward the grand oak double doors of the dining room, and did not look back when I heard Camilla frantically ask Julian what I meant by that, or wait for their response. As I stepped out of the sprawling mansion, walking past the oil portraits of sterling ancestors, and out into the warm, humid evening air, I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my shoulders. The valet had already brought my car around. My luggage was hastily packed and waiting in the trunk, placed there by Eleanor's staff. They had planned this ambush down to the absolute last detail, expecting to physically throw me out if I resisted. I handed the valet a crisp $100 bill, slid into the driver's seat of my car, and locked the doors, and sat there for a brief moment, gripping the leather steering wheel, staring up at the massive glowing windows of the estate. I could see their silhouettes moving in the dining room, celebrating their hollow victory, and pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking application, prepared to deposit the millions that would fund my new life. Then I booked a one-way, first-class ticket to London. The Sterlings thought they had discarded me. They thought they had buried me under the massive weight of their money and their immense social influence, and did not realize they had just funded their own spectacular destruction. Then I got straight to work, and did not waste a single day mourning a man who had never loved me, or a family that had viewed me as nothing more than a defective incubator for their precious legacy. Instead, I opened my laptop and immediately routed Eleanor's $5 million payoff through a complex, legal labyrinth of high-yield offshore accounts spanning from the Cayman Islands to Switzerland. I diversified the massive funds into aggressive tech startups and premium real estate investment trusts, ensuring that the sterling hush money was working for me every single second of the day. Within 2 short weeks, I had leveraged my newly acquired capital to lease a sleek, glass-walled office space in the heart of Mayfair, and legally registered my new enterprise, and hired a small but ruthless team of researchers, chemical analysts, and legal experts. I was no longer just an independent art consultant, playing in the minor leagues of the American South, and was now the founder and principal director of my own international forensic brokerage, specializing in authenticating hyper-rare contemporary pieces for ultra-high net worth individuals and exposing fraudulent masterpieces. The London art scene was notoriously insular, dominated by old-money European brokers who initially looked at a young American woman with polite, thinly veiled amusement. They assumed I was out of my depth and assumed I lacked the connections and the pedigree to survive in their shark tank. They assumed wrong. My first major power play came 4 months after I arrived in the United Kingdom. I celebrated that evening by drinking vintage champagne alone on the balcony of my newly purchased penthouse overlooking the River Thames. I was building an impenetrable empire, brick by solid brick, funded by the severance package of my own misery. While I was conquering the European art world and mingling with global billionaires, my ex-husband was busy performing in a tragic circus of his own making back in Charleston. Through a mutual friend who had remained loyal to me, I received a video clip that encapsulated the hollow, pathetic reality of the Sterling family. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and Eleanor had orchestrated a massive, ostentatious gender reveal party at the most exclusive country club in the city. She had spared no expense to ensure the entire elite circle was present to witness the glorious triumph of her bloodline. At the absolute center of this chaotic Vanity Fair stood Julian and Camilla. Camilla was expertly playing the role of the glowing mother-to-be, laughing a little too at unfunny jokes and constantly shifting her posture to make sure the hired event photographers captured her from every flattering angle. Julian, however, looked utterly exhausted. The dark, heavy circles under his eyes were clearly visible even through the low resolution of the cell phone video. When the time came for the big reveal, hundreds of blue confetti pieces and helium balloons shot violently into the sky. Twin boys, the prestigious Sterling name was finally secure. They were celebrating a massive lie, oblivious to the devastating fact that his own biology had betrayed him long ago. But as I sat watching that video from my luxurious London office, I did not feel a single ounce of jealousy or regret, and had detached myself from their suffocating rules. Here, power was the only currency that mattered. It was a cold Tuesday evening when I arrived at Sotheby's for an exclusive, invite-only auction featuring contemporary African art, and was there on behalf of a notoriously demanding client who wanted a specific bronze sculpture by a rising Senegalese artist. I took my seat near the front of the lavishly decorated auction room, wearing a sharply tailored, emerald green suit that commanded absolute attention. When the sculpture was finally brought onto the stage, the auctioneer started the bidding at £2 million. I raised my numbered paddle immediately. 2.5, I called out, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I expected a swift victory, but before the auctioneer could even acknowledge my bid, a deep, resonant voice echoed from the back of the room. 3 million. I turned my head slightly, my eyes scanning the dimly lit rows of antique wooden chairs, until I found the source of the interruption. He was sitting casually in the last row, his long legs crossed, projecting an aura of absolute, unbothered confidence, and wore a fitted midnight blue tuxedo with no tie, the top two buttons of his crisp white shirt undone, and was strikingly handsome, with dark skin, a sharp jawline, and piercing brown eyes that were currently locked onto mine. I did not know his name yet, but I instantly recognized the dangerous, calculating energy radiating from him. He had the sharp, hungry look of a predator who had built his empire from the ground up. 3.5, I countered loudly, turning my attention straight back to the auctioneer. 4 million, the man replied instantly, not missing a single beat. 5 million, I shot back, gripping my paddle tightly. 5.5, he said, his voice dropping an octave, practically purring with amusement. I knew my client's absolute limit was 6 million, and had to end this immediately before he drove the price into an unacceptable range. 6 million, I announced, standing up slowly from my chair, turning to face him fully. I stared him down with a look of pure, icy warning. He held my gaze for 5 agonizingly long seconds. The entire room fell silent. Then, slowly, a devastatingly charming smile spread across his face. He respectfully tilted his head toward me and lowered his paddle. Going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the green suit for 6 million, the auctioneer shouted, slamming his wooden gavel down hard. I had barely signed the final wire transfer authorization in the private payment lounge when the heavy oak door swung open behind me. It was him, up close. He was even more imposing, standing well over 6 feet tall, carrying a tumbler of scotch. Dominic Banks, he said, extending a large warm hand toward me. I apologize for running up the price on your sculpture. I just wanted to see how far you were willing to go. Serafina Sterling, I replied smoothly, taking his hand. And you just cost my client an extra £1 million just to test my limits. Dominic laughed, a rich, vibrant sound. Well, Serafina, you have an intimidating poker face. I am the founder of a private equity tech firm here in London, formerly a cyber analyst for MI6. I came tonight, looking to buy something beautiful for my new corporate headquarters, but I think I found something infinitely more captivating. His directness caught me off guard. Over the next several weeks, Dominic Banks systematically dismantled every defensive wall I had spent years building around my heart. He did not court me with traditional, boring dinner dates, and treated me like an equal partner in a high-stakes corporate merger. He engaged with my mind, challenging my opinions on global markets and modern expressionism. When I finally told him the brutal truth about my divorce, the $5 million hush money, and the forged infertility diagnosis that Eleanor had used to exile me, he did not offer me hollow pity. He poured me a glass of 50-year-old scotch, leaned across his massive glass desk, and looked at me with eyes full of dangerous respect. "You took their money and used it to become a kingmaker," he said softly, shaking his head in sheer awe. "They underestimated you. They thought they were burying a victim, but they planted a seed instead." That was the exact moment I realized I was falling in love with him. Dominic saw the ruthless survivor in me, and instead of being intimidated by my strength like Julian had been, he practically worshipped it. Our romance escalated with breathtaking speed. We became an unstoppable, visible power couple in the European elite circuit, operating off the radar of the petty, gossip-obsessed society back in Charleston. That perfect, peaceful life was about to be violently interrupted. It was 4 months into my relationship with Dominic. We were attending an ultra-exclusive winter gala at a historic mansion in Mayfair. I was wearing a floor-length crimson silkskin, feeling utterly invincible after effortlessly charming the board members of a massive Scandinavian tech conglomerate. Dominic stood beside me as a waiter offered us fresh flutes of vintage champagne. I reached for the crystal glass, but as my fingers brushed the delicate stem, a sudden, violent wave of nausea slammed into my chest. The bright chandeliers above me seemed to violently sway, blurring into brilliant streaks of white light. A loud ringing sound erupted in my ears. I gripped Dominic's arm tightly, my nails digging into his dark wool jacket. The marble floor rushed up to meet me. The last thing I heard before slipping into total darkness was the sound of my champagne flute shattering against the stone. When I finally opened my eyes, the opulent ballroom had been replaced by the pristine, stark white walls of a private medical suite. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed in the quiet room. Dominic was sitting flush against the mattress, gripping my free hand with a fierce intensity. Before I could speak, the heavy wooden door opened. A distinguished-looking physician with silver hair walked into the room. He introduced himself as Dr. Arrington, the chief of internal medicine. He wheeled a large ultrasound machine to the side of my bed, applied a cold gel to my lower abdomen, and pressed the transponder against my skin. The screen flickered to life. He tapped a few buttons, and suddenly a rapid, rhythmic whooshing sound filled the quiet room. It sounded like the frantic galloping of a tiny horse. "Congratulations, miss," Dr. Arrington said, his voice smooth and calm. "You fainted due to a slight drop in your blood pressure, which is normal, and are 10 weeks pregnant." The rhythmic galloping sound echoing from the machine felt like a severe physical blow to my chest. "No," I whispered, shaking my head frantically. "That is impossible. I am sterile. I have severe, irreversible scarring on my ovaries." Dr. Vance explicitly stated my fallopian tubes were blocked. I pulled out phone, accessing my secure digital medical portal, and shoved the files from Atlanta into Dr. Arrington's hands. Dr. Arrington scrolled through the digital records, his professional demeanor slowly cracking into a deep, troubled frown. "This makes no sense," he muttered. "The pathology reports in this Atlanta file describe a reproductive system that has been decimated. But looking at your ultrasound right now, I see zero evidence of any such trauma." I demanded a full MRI immediately. For the next 3 hours, I was pushed through high-tech scanning machines. When I was finally wheeled back, Dr. Arrington carried a thick folder of fresh imaging results. "Your reproductive system is flawless. Dr. Arrington stated firmly, "The files provided by your doctor in Atlanta are complete fabrications. He intentionally diagnosed you with a severe condition you never possessed, and he doctored your official medical records to support that lie." The realization hit me with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. Dr. Vance was the prominent Sterling family doctor. He was on the direct payroll of the massive family fund. The entire agonizing narrative of my infertility, the brutal $5 million divorce settlement, it was all a calculated, orchestrated lie. Why? The horrific answer finally materialized: Julian, the golden child, who needed an heir to secure his massive ego. It was not me who was broken. It was him. Eleanor had orchestrated this massive deception simply to protect her son from the social humiliation of being sterile. She had decided to sacrifice my sanity and my marriage just to maintain their flawless public image. Sitting in that London hospital room, listening to the impossible, beautiful heartbeat of my unborn child, I made a silent, deadly vow and was going to annihilate them. Dominic immediately understood the dangerous shift in my demeanor. He recognized the cold, calculating look in my eyes because it was the exact same look he possessed when orchestrating a hostile corporate takeover. He simply pulled out his secure phone and made a single brief call. The hunt had begun. Within 48 hours, I was discharged from the hospital and sitting comfortably in my glass-walled Mayfair office, sliding a thick file across my desk to the most ruthless private investigator money could buy. His name was Silas, a former British intelligence operative who specialized in corporate espionage, offshore financial tracking, and unearthing the buried secrets of the global elite. He did not ask questions about morality, and only asked for a target. I gave him Dr. Vance. I wanted to know every single detail about the esteemed Sterling family physician, and wanted his bank records, his private emails, his offshore accounts, and the digital footprint of every single transaction he had made over the last 5 years. I gave Silas a blank check, funded by the very money Eleanor had paid me to disappear, and told him to tear Dr. Vance's life apart and find the exact price of my suffering. Silas went to work with terrifying efficiency. He bypassed standard legal channels, utilizing a network of high-level forensic accountants and financial insiders to breach the encrypted servers of Dr. Vance's private medical practice in Charleston. It only took Silas 2 weeks to return to my office with a sleek black hard drive containing the answers that would ultimately destroy the Sterling dynasty. We sat in the dimly lit boardroom of my firm, Dominic standing silently by the window, while Silas connected the drive to the projector. The first image that flashed onto the screen was a complex financial flowchart. Silas explained that Dr. Vance lived a lifestyle far exceeding the standard income of a private family physician. He owned a massive vacation estate in the Hamptons, a luxury yacht moored in Miami, and a fleet of imported sports cars. None of these extravagant assets were registered in his actual name. They were hidden behind an intricate web of anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. But Silas had followed the digital money trail, tracing the funds backward through a series of offshore accounts until he hit the absolute source. Silas clicked a button, and a scanned bank document appeared on the massive screen. It was a wire transfer authorization. The amount was staggering, $750 million. The date on the transfer was 1 week before Dr. Vance had first called me into his office to deliver the devastating, fabricated news that my reproductive system was permanently compromised. And the signature at the bottom of the wire transfer authorization belonged to Eleanor Sterling. The transaction was cleverly disguised as an anonymous charitable donation to a medical research foundation that Dr. Vance secretly controlled. It was a massive, untraceable bribe. Eleanor had literally purchased my medical diagnosis. But the financial corruption was only the beginning of the nightmare. Silas clicked to the next slide, bringing up a classified encrypted medical file that he had extracted from a hidden offline server in Dr. Vance's basement. The name at the top of the file was Julian Sterling. Silas looked at me with a grim expression and explained that he had cross-referenced the dates. Julian had visited Dr. Vance for a comprehensive fertility screening 6 months before my own invasive testing had even begun. I read the medical jargon glowing on the screen, my blood running cold. The official diagnosis was highlighted in bright yellow ink: non-obstructive azoospermia. I stared at the words, the clinical terminology burned themselves into my memory. Julian's reproductive system was not just compromised. It was, and utterly barren. The report detailed that his body produced 0 sperm due to a severe, undocumented bout of complications from an infection he suffered during his early teenage years. The condition was irreversible. There was no surgery, no experimental medication, and no amount of sterling money that could ever fix it. Julian was genetically incapable of fathering a child. He was a complete biological dead end. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal washed over me in sickening waves. Everything suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. Eleanor had always known her golden son was defective. In the hyper-competitive, image-obsessed world of the Charleston elite, a man's worth is often tied to his ability to produce heirs. In their powerful country club circles, family lineage was worshipped right alongside God. The Sterling name was a brand, a symbol of unmatched strength, virility, and generational dominance. Julian was the chief executive officer of the family trust, a prominent member of his prestigious fraternity, and the supposed alpha male of their social hierarchy. If the high society gossip ever discovered that the Prince of Charleston was sterile, it would have shattered his fragile masculine ego and severely damaged the pristine, powerful image Eleanor had spent decades cultivating. Eleanor could not allow her son to be viewed as inadequate or flawed. She needed a scapegoat to carry the immense burden of his biological failure. And I was the perfect, expendable target and was the outsider. I was the woman who did not come from old money, who worked for a living, and who had never submitted to Eleanor's controlling demands, and sat in my luxurious London office, gripping the edge of the mahogany table as a tidal wave of suppressed memories flooded my mind. I remembered sitting in the sterile examination room, trembling with fear, while Dr. Vance showed me the forged ultrasound images of my supposedly ruined reproductive organs. I remembered the heavy, crushing guilt I felt every time I looked at Julian, genuinely believing that my broken body was denying him the family he wanted. I realized with a wave of absolute horror that I had spent 2 years swallowing unknown chemical compounds, likely nothing more than high-dose vitamins designed to mimic the side effects of real fertility treatments, just to keep up the elaborate illusion. They had poisoned my mind and manipulated my body, and had watched me cry myself to sleep night after night, begging the universe to fix my broken womb, while they secretly knew I was healthy. Julian had held me in his arms, whispering that we would overcome my infertility together, aware that he was the one shooting blanks. He was not just a coward, and was a sinister, pathological liar who was willing to sacrifice my sanity to protect his own pathetic pride. And then there was Camilla, the young, opportunistic mistress, who was currently parading around Charleston with a pregnant belly. If Julian was 100% sterile, then the twin boys Camilla was carrying did not belong to him. I looked up at Silas, my mind racing through the dark, twisted implications of this massive revelation. "Do we know who the real father of Camilla's babies is?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Silas shook his head slightly. "Not definitively yet. Camilla has been careful with her communications. However, my surveillance team in Charleston has noted that she spends an unusual amount of time alone with Julian's younger brother, Darius. They frequent the same private VIP rooms at exclusive clubs when Julian is traveling for business. But without a direct DNA test, it remains circumstantial. It did not matter. The identity of the real father was just the explosive detonator waiting to be pressed. The primary weapon was already locked and loaded in my hands. I had the undeniable, concrete proof of their massive medical fraud and had the wire transfers. I had Julian's real medical file, and had everything I needed to burn the Sterling legacy to the absolute ground. Dominic walked over and placed his hands on my shoulders, grounding me in the present moment. "You have the truth now, Serafina," he said softly, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, protective energy. "What do you want to do with it?" I looked at the glowing screen, staring at the financial records of the people who had tried to destroy me. They had paid me $5 million to disappear quietly, assuming I would fade into pathetic obscurity, and thought they had buried their dirty secrets under a mountain of hush money and high society influence. They thought they had secured their perfect, untouchable future with a fake pregnancy and a stolen empire. I reached out and closed the laptop, plunging the boardroom into a quiet, heavy darkness. "I do not want to just expose. Exposure is too quick, too merciful," I stated, my voice echoing with icy resolve. "I want them to build their fraudulent castle as high as possible, and want Eleanor to brag to every single woman in her country club. I want Julian to stand in front of his wealthy investors and boast about his unborn sons, and want them to invest every single ounce of their pride, their money, and their reputation into this massive lie. And then, when they are standing at the absolute pinnacle of their false glory, I am going to rip the foundation right out from under them, and watch them plummet into total ruin." I turned to meet Dominic's intense gaze. "I am going to let them have their babies. I am going to let them host their extravagant baby showers and finalize their ridiculous society wedding. And while they are distracted by their fake family, we are going to buy up the massive debt of the Sterling Family Trust. We are going to bleed their empire dry from the inside out." Dominic smiled, a predatory, brilliant expression that matched the darkness blooming inside my own chest. "A hostile financial takeover," he agreed smoothly, "funded by their own severance package." It is absolute poetry. 8 months had passed since that revelation in the London clinic. While Dominic and I were consolidating our financial stronghold over the Sterling Empire, from the shadows of our European headquarters, the glittering illusion Eleanor had so constructed in Charleston was beginning to fracture under its own immense weight. The Sterlings had gotten what they wanted. Julian and Camilla had been married in a spectacularly lavish ceremony, complete with a 6-tier cake, a celebrity guest list, and a massive spread in a prominent high society magazine. 3 months after the wedding, Camilla delivered the anticipated heirs to the Sterling dynasty. 2 baby boys named Julian Jr. and Kingston. From the outside looking in, they were the absolute picture of generational wealth and perfection. But inside the cold, cavernous walls of the Sterling estate, a toxic environment was boiling over. The first major red flag was glaringly obvious to anyone who dared to look closely. The twins did not look a single thing like Julian. Julian possessed striking, sharp, angular features that had defined the men of the Sterling lineage for 3 generations. The twins, however, were exceptionally fair, with a very specific soft bone structure and hazel eyes that bypassed Julian's genetics. Of course, babies often favor one parent over the other. But as the months went by, the infants began to display distinct facial expressions, hair textures, and physical mannerisms that were foreign to Julian. They did, however, bear an uncanny, terrifying resemblance to his younger brother, Darius. Darius had always been the black sheep of the family, known for his hazel eyes and his irresponsible, hedonistic lifestyle. Every time Darius visited the estate to see his new nephews, an uncomfortable, suffocating tension filled the room. Julian would stand in the corner, nursing a glass of scotch, watching Darius hold the babies with a sickening sense of intuition, gnawing at his gut. But Eleanor forced the narrative. Whenever a wealthy friend came over to visit the nursery and made even the slightest comment about the babies looking a bit different than expected, Eleanor would immediately shut them down. She filled the mansion with massive, custom-painted portraits of Julian holding the boys, literally papering over the obvious physical discrepancies with sheer financial force, and was determined to maintain the perfect facade, blind to the fact that she had invited a ruthless predator into her home. Camilla had dropped her innocent, sweet girl act the absolute second The ink was dry on their marriage certificate, and the babies were safely delivered. She was no longer the grateful, accommodating young woman who had tearfully begged me to step aside, and had secured her position as the mother of the Sterling heirs, and she was going to extract every single ounce of power that title afforded her. Camilla realized that Julian was dependent on her to maintain his fragile masculine image, and she used that leverage to become a tyrant. She began making outrageous financial demands, bypassing Julian and going straight to the board of the family fund. She demanded a 20% ownership stake in the company, citing her need to secure a financial future for the boys. When Julian weakly tried to protest, Camilla simply smiled a cruel, knowing smile and threatened to pack up the twins and leave him for a publicized divorce. Julian, terrified of the public humiliation that would follow losing another wife so quickly, folded and gave her the shares. Julian was deteriorating under the immense pressure of his miserable reality. He had traded a loyal, self-sufficient wife for a demanding tyrant, all to secure a biological legacy that his own subconscious was begging him to question, and was drinking heavily, popping anxiety medication, just to make it through his board meetings. He was a man drowning in a shallow pool of his own making. The fragile, miserable universe they had constructed was about to be violently shattered by an unforeseen biological crisis. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening, 8 months after the twins were born. The silence of the mansion was suddenly broken by a frantic, piercing scream from the nursery. Julian rushed down the hallway, bursting through the door, to find the night nurse hovering over little Kingston's crib in absolute panic. The baby was limp, his skin carrying a terrifying grayish-blue tint. His breathing was shallow, and his tiny chest was barely moving. Julian scooped the infant into his arms, his heart hammering against his ribs in sheer terror. He yelled for Eleanor to call an ambulance, ignoring Camilla, who had come running out of her room, demanding to know what was ruining her evening. The ride to the hospital was a chaotic blur of screaming sirens and agonizing panic. They arrived at the elite pediatric wing of the Charleston Medical Center. Within an hour, word had spread through their elite social circles. Several prominent board members arrived at the hospital to offer their prayers, sitting in the plush waiting area, whispering among themselves while watching the family fall apart. Dr. Evans explained that Kingston had suffered a severe sudden hemolytic crisis. The infant's red blood cells were breaking down, depriving his vital organs of oxygen. The condition was caused by a rare, specific hereditary blood disorder that had managed to bypass their initial newborn screenings. Kingston was in critical condition and needed an immediate, massive blood transfusion to stabilize his system. Julian did not hesitate for a single second. He rolled up the sleeve of his dress shirt and extended his arm toward the doctor. "Take my blood," he demanded, his voice cracking with desperate emotion. "I am his father, take whatever he needs. Just say my son." Evans looked at Julian, maintaining absolute professional calm. Given the extreme rarity of this specific hereditary condition, a direct paternal match is often the absolute safest and most effective route for the initial emergency transfusion. "We will draw your blood immediately, Mr. Sterling, and rush it to the lab for a rapid cross-match." Eleanor stood up, her face drained of color. She looked at Camilla, who was staring at the doctor with wide, terrified eyes. The matriarch's hands began to tremble violently. She knew the absolute, undeniable truth about her son's sterility, and knew that Julian's blood would never, under any circumstances, match the infant fighting for his life. But she was trapped. She could not stop the doctor without screaming her massive fraudulent secret to the entire hospital wing full of her society friends. Julian was ushered into an adjacent medical room, focused on saving the child he believed was his own flesh and blood. He sat in the cold leather chair, watching the nurse insert the thick needle into his vein, feeling a profound sense of paternal duty wash over him, and was unaware that the vial of dark red blood traveling down the hospital corridor was not going to save his family. It was the exact chemical weapon that was going to permanently destroy it. The results of that rapid cross-match would not just expose a simple medical incompatibility. It would detonate the $5 million lie they had used to banish me from Charleston. And the devastating fallout was going to be spectacular. Shortly after midnight, the heavy double doors swung open. Dr. Evans walked out carrying a single piece of paper. The entire waiting room instantly went dead silent. Julian stepped forward, demanding, "Tell me you gave him my blood. Tell me my son is going to be all right." Dr. Evans did not smile. He looked at Julian with a mixture of profound pity and professional detachment. "Mr. Sterling, we have stabilized Kingston using emergency O-negative donor blood from our hospital reserves. He is currently resting and responding well." Julian let out a loud theatrical sigh of relief, turning back to look at the society members with a triumphant smile. "Then why did you not use my blood?" Julian asked, turning back to the doctor. "I am his father." Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, I cannot use your blood for the transfusion because it would trigger a fatal immune response. Your rapid cross-match results just came back from the laboratory. Mr. Sterling, you are AB negative. It is biologically, scientifically impossible for a man with an AB negative blood type to father a child with an O negative blood type. The baby lacks both the A and B antigens that you would have passed down." Julian froze, the triumphant smile melted off his face, replaced by a blank, uncomprehending stare. "What are you talking about?" Julian asked, his voice suddenly sounding very small. Eleanor shoved her way through the crowd, her face flushed with absolute panic. "The doctor is just exhausted, Julian. He is reading the wrong chart. Let us go into a private room." Julian ripped his arm away from his mother's grip. He stepped closer to Dr. Evans, his physical posture turning aggressive. "Are you calling my wife a liar?" Julian shouted, his voice echoing violently down the hospital corridor. "Are you telling me that my son is not mine?" Dr. Evans did not back down. "I am not making any accusations, Mr. Sterling. I am simply reading the laboratory results. You are not the biological father of that child." A loud collective gasp erupted from the elite crowd. Camilla had shrunk into her plastic chair, her face buried in her hands. Julian demanded a full DNA test immediately, forcing everyone in the room to wait 3 excruciating hours for the rapid genetics lab to process the cheek swab. When Dr. Evans finally returned, he held a single sheet of paper. "I am sorry, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Evans said clearly, ensuring his voice carried across the dead-silent waiting room. "The rapid DNA results are conclusive. The probability of paternity is 0%. You are not the father. 0%. The words hit Julian like a physical blow to the stomach. His entire identity, his perceived masculinity, his unquestioned dominance in the family hierarchy, all of it instantly vaporized. He let out a guttural, agonizing scream that tore through the hospital lobby, a sound of pure, unadulterated humiliation, and had spent his entire life mocking weakness, utterly convinced of his own genetic superiority. Now he was the ultimate punchline, but the absolute worst part of his nightmare was only just beginning. Because the identity of the real father was still sitting comfortably inside the Sterling mansion, unaware that the explosive truth was about to walk right through the front door. The drive back to the Sterling estate was conducted in a suffocating, terrifying silence. Julian gripped the steering wheel of his Mercedes so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white, driving recklessly through the dark Charleston roads. In the passenger seat, Camilla sat curled into a tight ball, trembling violently, sobbing quietly. In the back seat, Eleanor sat rigid and silent, her mind racing to find a way out of the collapsing labyrinth she had built. But there was no escape. Hospital had drawn the blood. The laboratory had processed the DNA. When the car finally screeched to a violent halt in the circular driveway of the mansion, Julian hauled Camilla roughly out of the passenger seat. He dragged her up the wide marble steps of the estate, kicking the heavy mahogany front doors open, and shoved Camilla into the center of the massive living room. She fell onto the plush Persian rug, weeping hysterically, her expensive silk dress ruined. "Who is it?" Julian roared, his voice echoing violently off the high-vaulted ceilings. Who did you sleep with, Julian, please? Camilla sobbed. I did not want to do it, and swear to God, I did not want to. Julian grabbed a priceless crystal vase and hurled it violently against the stone fireplace. Stop lying to me. Look me in the eyes and tell me the name of the man who gave you those children. Eleanor finally walked through the front doors, attempting to project her usual aura of commanding authority, but her hands were shaking visibly. Julian, that is enough. We will handle this discreetly in the morning. Discreetly? Julian screamed. Half of your elite circle was sitting in that hospital waiting room. The entire city knows I am a joke. He turned his attention back to Camilla, growling, Give me the name, or I will throw you out into the street tonight. Camilla, desperate for a shield, scanned the room. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the library swung open. Darius walked out, holding a half-empty glass of expensive bourbon. He froze when he saw the shattered crystal and his older brother standing over a weeping Camilla like a vengeful god. Darius immediately sensed the explosive danger and took a step backward, intending to sneak out. But Camilla saw him. She pointed a shaking finger at the younger Sterling brother. It is him, she screamed, her voice cracking with desperate hysteria. It is Darius, he is the father. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Darius stopped dead in his tracks, his face drained of color. Julian slowly turned his head to look at his younger brother. His mind was violently connecting the pieces of the puzzle he had previously refused to see. The hazel eyes, the lighter complexion, the uncomfortable tension. His own lazy, irresponsible party boy younger brother had slept with his wife and fathered the children he had claimed as his own. You bastard, Julian whispered. Julian charged across the living room with the speed and ferocity of a wild animal. He tackled Darius to the floor. The two brothers crashed violently into a heavy wooden console table, knocking over expensive lamps. Julian pinned Darius to the hardwood floor, driving his fist repeatedly into his brother's face. He hit him with 5 years of suppressed insecurity, the utter humiliation of the hospital waiting room, and the devastating realization of his own biological failure. Eleanor screamed, trying to pull Julian off his brother. Stop it, you are going to kill him. But before Julian could strike again, Camilla scrambled to her feet. Don't touch him, Camilla screamed at the top of her lungs. Stop hitting him, Julian. It was not his fault. Your mother made us do it. Julian's fist froze in midair. He slowly turned his head to look at Camilla. What did you just say? Camilla stood in the center of the ruined living room, pointing at Eleanor. She came to me months before we even got married, and knew you were sterile, Julian. She knew you could never give her the heirs she wanted for this family. She orchestrated the entire thing. She forced Darius to sleep with me and told us it was the only way to protect your ego and save the family reputation. She paid your ex-wife $5 million to leave, so you would never find out you were the one who was broken. Julian slowly stood up, backing away from his bleeding brother. He turned his gaze toward his mother. Eleanor stood frozen, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. The powerful, commanding matriarch, who had dictated the social rules of the Charleston elite for decades, suddenly looked small and pathetic. Julian stared at the woman who had engineered his massive public destruction just to save face at her country club. He did not yell. The violent rage was replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. His mother had fundamentally destroyed his entire grasp on reality. Julian slowly walked toward the front door, leaving his fraudulent family paralyzed in their own toxic wasteland. But as he stood on the threshold, the silence was broken by a sound that snapped the final remaining thread of his sanity. Darius let out a pathetic whimper, apologizing to Eleanor for getting caught. That single sound of weakness ignited a blinding rage inside Julian. He charged back through the open mahogany doors. Camilla cowered behind a massive marble pillar, pulling out her phone to silently record the brutal fight, collecting video evidence of Julian's violent instability to hand to her divorce lawyers. Within 10 minutes, the blinding red and blue lights of 4 police cruisers illuminated the circular driveway. Officers stormed the mansion with their weapons drawn. They found the prominent chief executive officer of the Sterling Trust and his vice president brother, covered in blood on the ruined floor. The police officers did not care about their elite social status. They secured heavy metal handcuffs around their wrists and marched both men out of the front doors in full view of the wealthy neighbors. Eleanor chased after the officers, frantically offering to write a massive check. But the commanding officer pushed her back behind the yellow police tape. By 5 o'clock the next morning, the pristine Sterling image was eviscerated. An anonymous source leaked the booking photos to the media. The mugshots were devastating. The devastating caption detailed the humiliating hospital fiasco, the catastrophic DNA results, and the brutal fistfight at the estate. The internet was merciless. The financial devastation that immediately followed was lethal. Major clients frantically called, demanding immediate full withdrawals. The Sterling Fund lacked the cash reserves to facilitate the massive sudden wave of panic. The company was instantly thrown into a severe terminal liquidity crisis. The company's stock plummeted 40% in a single afternoon. Eleanor was radioactive. The empire they had built over 3 generations was burning to the absolute ground. While Julian was sitting in a holding cell, Camilla executed her final lethal maneuver. She contacted the most ruthless divorce lawyer in Charleston, using a catastrophic legal loophole in her prenuptial agreement. The prenup specifically stated that Camilla would receive a permanent 50% ownership stake in the estate if she produced Sterling heirs. It failed to specify that those heirs had to be biologically fathered by Julian himself. Because Darius was a legitimate Sterling, the twin boys legally fulfilled the exact requirements of the contract. Camilla froze all of Julian's personal bank accounts and secured an immediate court-ordered eviction notice. She stripped Julian of his luxurious home, his money, and his remaining public dignity. When Julian's was finally released, the corporate board had terminated his position as CEO. His mother had disowned him. Julian was forced to check into a miserable, run-down motel on the desolate outskirts of the city. He had nothing left in the world. In his twisted, desperate, agonizing state, he sought out the only person he believed he could still mentally control. He typed my name into the digital search bar, expecting to find a pathetic, depressed woman. Instead, he found a massive digital spread from European Vogue. There I was, standing on the sprawling balcony of my luxurious Mayfair penthouse, hailed as the new queen of the European art market. Julian's fractured, delusional mind convinced him that my undeniable success was actually an elaborate, desperate cry for his help. He genuinely, pathetically believed I would welcome him back with wide-open arms. He frantically checked his old airline loyalty accounts, using his last remaining frequent flyer miles to book a single, direct one-way economy ticket to France, where the Vogue article mentioned I would be attending an exclusive gala. The crisp, golden sunlight of a perfect French afternoon spilled across the manicured gardens of the Château de Villette. I was standing in the center of the massive master bridal suite, draped in a breathtaking custom-designed silk wedding gown that accentuated the beautiful curve of my 6-month baby bump. Dominic had rented out the entire historic private estate for a massive, multi-day celebration. My private makeup artist had just stepped out of the room, leaving me alone. That perfect, tranquil silence was suddenly and violently shattered. The heavy solid mahogany doors of my bridal suite were forcefully shoved open. Julian stood in the doorway, his chest heaving violently. He looked horrifying. His face was covered in dark, yellowing bruises. He was severely unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, wearing the exact same tailored designer suit. He had been violently arrested in days prior, stained with dry blood, and stepped into the room, his frantic eyes taking in the massive crystal chandeliers and the expensive crushed velvet furniture. He froze completely, his body going rigid as his eyes slowly drifted downward, locking onto the unmistakable, rounded curve of my pregnant stomach. The sheer shock on his face was almost comical to witness. His jaw dropped open in absolute disbelief, to protect his shattered, desperate mind from collapsing. He instantly defaulted to pure, venomous hostility. He pointed a shaking, filthy finger at my stomach. "So this is why you took the money." He spat. "You were sleeping with some European trash the entire time we were married, and stole $5 million from my family to fund this ridiculous charade. Whose bastard child is that, Serafina?" I did not scream, and simply looked at his red, bruised face, and I started to laugh. It was a rich, full, relaxed laugh that echoed off the high-vaulted ceilings. My laughter shattered the aggressive, threatening momentum he had tried to build. "What is so funny?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. I took a slow, measured step toward him. "Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm and dripping with lethal certainty. "Did your manipulative mother ever tell you why I signed those divorce papers so easily?" I walked away because I knew the absolute truth, and knew that Camilla was pregnant. And I knew with absolute biological certainty that you were not the father. Julian froze, taking a shaky step backward. "You are lying, nobody knew that, I knew it." "Julian," I replied smoothly, because unlike you, I did not blindly trust Dr. Vance. When I came to London, an elite team of specialists found a healthy, flawless reproductive system and was never infertile. Your mother paid Dr. Vance $750,000 to fabricate my medical records. I walked over to my heavy antique writing desk, pulled out the thick manila folder my private investigator had delivered to me 8 months ago, and shoved it against his chest. "Open it," I commanded. Julian's fingers trembled violently as he opened the folder, revealing his classified medical file. "You have non-obstructive azoospermia," I stated, the clinical words slicing through his shattered ego. "You produce 0 sperm, and are genetically incapable of fathering a child. You always have been. Your mother bought you a fake diagnosis to protect your fragile masculine pride. She orchestrated the affair between Camilla and your brother Darius, just to produce babies that carried the sterling blood." Julian stared at the irrefutable evidence of his own biological failure. The massive, indestructible fortress of his ego collapsed. He was nothing more than a pathetic, manipulated pawn. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto his knees in the center of my bridal suite. He buried his face in his dirty hands and began to sob violently. I looked down at the broken man and delivered the absolute final blow.